Nothing has changed for 30 years. No matter how many times you try, the result will be the same.
Yes. Like our chess games. You always seem to win.
Do you know why?
You tell me.
Because you're a bad player.
Killer7 is a good game. The only problem is that I'm gonna have a hard time telling you why. We'll make this simple. First I'll explain the basics of the game, then I'll talk about the PC port in specific, and then I'll tell you what actually makes this game so good in the first place. Killer7 was designed by Grasshopper and published by Capcom. It's a fucked up love child of an on-the-rails shooter mixed with puzzles and light RPG stats. The genre itself actually maintains a wholesome uniqueness that I haven't seen replicated ever. The story of Killer7 can be summed up like this. The year is 2010. The world has progressed into a state of global political instability mixed with a never-ending Cold War, having every nation face off against each other and being on the brink of World War III. And during all of this, terrorism has peaked at an all-time high, particularly in the United States. You assume the role of controlling a covert assassination syndicate known as the Killer7, a group of elite off-the-record killers who are sent in by the American government to take down high-value targets. Their main opposition during the course of the game is a terrorist organization known as Heaven's Smiles. They differ from the commonly assumed gun-toting freaks of contemporary perceptions in that they're actually bioengineered living bombs that are sent to destroy key structures, facilities, and people who are paramount to maintaining global order. While in truth, the Killer7 is actually no bigger than a few people. The leader of the group, Harmon Smith, is a professional assassin who has such an insanely powerful psyche that it has caused him to adopt something akin to a split personality disorder, which through the help of his assistant, Garcian Smith, allows him to physically bring to life these personalities and give them corporeal form. Each one of the personalities makes up a perceived group of the Killer7, in being that there are 7 active operatives in all, excluding Harmon himself. Each one of these individuals has their own unique traits and aptitudes for combat, ranging in their differences as weapon selection to tactical strategies, and uncommonly, their more tertiary and bizarre talents, like Katie, who can manipulate her blood to alter the environment around her, or Mask, who is a luchador and has immense physical prowess. Their main enemy is a collective terrorist organization whose primary weapon is the aptly named Heaven's Smiles themselves, humanoid beings that have been engineered as explosive petards of maniacal doom. Most information about them is kept under wrap, and when civilians ever become aware of them, it usually ends very, very poorly for them. The Smiles act as the soldiers, but their only method of attack is exploding themselves to cause damage. Translating this into the gameplay, it essentially boils down to you, the player, hoping to kill them before they can reach you. It doesn't take much of them to bring you down. The world outside of your jobs is crapsack. Whilst everyone enjoys their modern luxuries, there's at least a dozen new conspiracies developed every day, Japan is being threatened every hour, and someone is being killed every minute. And that's just the first way to explain the story. The gameplay is actually a very simplistic manner, and you literally don't use more than a few buttons at any given time. You take control of your character, moving throughout separate stages in the game. When you see an enemy, you switch over from this third-person view to a first-person shooter perspective. You find the target, kill them, and move on. So here's where it gets weird. And I'll be explaining this using the GameCube controls for these examples. Controls consist of no more than the analog stick with a multi-purpose context-sensitive button, followed by shoulder buttons for entering first person and looking behind you. The rest serves little more than secondary effects like powering up your shots or opening the map. It's almost all focused around the stick and the A button. Movement isn't what you'd expect. You don't use the analog stick to move at all. You hold down A to move along a linear line. You're not able to walk backwards. You can only ever move forward. So whilst you can change the direction you walk, there's only ever 2 ways you're going. There will be branching paths popping up as you move throughout the stages, but they operate the exact same otherwise. It's a very twisted way of exploring a world. You don't have the power of 360 degrees. You've got what's ahead of you, nothing else. Bear in mind, enemies don't play by these rules. Shooting is self-explanatory. What isn't is everything that surrounds it. Holding R lets you enter into first person to fire your gun. The analog stick now serves as your aim, and A is your trigger. Most enemies in the game are humanoid, so you can easily recognize them. If not for their stature, then for their unusual color palettes. When you've expended the ammo in your firearm, you have to reload. You have an unlimited supply of additional ammo, so there's no need to worry about running out. How do you reload? Why, push the C stick in a direction. Though if your gun is completely empty, firing again will cause you to reload. You can reload in and out of combat, so it never hurts to top off. The Y button during fire will enable certain characters to charge up their attack for more damage, or even different effects. Finally, discovering your enemies. When you go to aim, you don't actually see your enemies, at least not clearly. You have to hold down L to scan the area in front of you, which will reveal your enemies. Normally, they're mostly invisible, and firing at them will have no effect. Only by scanning their presence will you be able to take them down. The controls might just sound plain weird. And that's because they are. But they're so intuitively designed that you start to adopt it really quickly. The game kind of proposes the thought that, do you really need more than this? It's not comparable to other games. It's simple whilst feeling liberating. There's a small crew of characters that you utilize. They're regarded as personalities whilst also individuals, and you'll be needing all of them at some part or another during the game. You're able to freely switch between one of the 6 available on the fly, with the 7th only being required during certain circumstances. Each character has their own abilities and fighting style. While everyone operates in the same manner, their guns are different, and their use of the level varies as well. Some can take more hits, some less. Some are specific with their use, others are all-rounders. Each mission starts you off with one pre-selected for you, and you have only a certain amount of the roster immediately available for you. You have to earn enough kills during the mission to unlock the other personalities, otherwise they just lay dormant. Killing enemies nets you a type of currency and experience. You can obtain blood for shooting enemies' limbs off, hitting their weak points, and some just flat out give you blood regardless. First, they give you thick blood, which acts as the experience of the game. Earning enough allows you to upgrade the capabilities of your roster, ranging from simple increases of damage, firing speed, locking on ability, and critical potential. They range in levels 0 to 5, the cost to increasing them rising the further they go. Certain characters receive special skills when you upgrade to certain levels, such as the power to shoot 2 bullets with 1 trigger pull, which won't consume additional ammo, to automatically aiming at certain body parts. The personalities are not equal in this regard. Some have overwhelming advantage in certain situations compared to others, so it pays off to understand the strengths and weaknesses of them all. The other blood type you obtain is Thin Blood. Thin Blood acts kind of like a power bomb system mixed with healing items. You can use a vial of Thin Blood to recover health of an injured personality, or you can use it with some of them to enable special attacks. And speaking of the team, here's the quick gist of them. Dan is a badass with a revolver. Katie is an emo with a scope. Kevin is a mutant ninja. Coyote is a thief with a revolver. Khan is a punk with dualies. Mask is a luchador with 2 grenade launchers. And Garcian is tall and also in charge. In the end, you'll generally be using probably 1 or 2 of the crew at most, mostly due to the fact that you'll find a preference in their weaponry and styles. But it does pay off to figure out how to utilize all of them equally. Outside of combat and moving about in the field, you're greeted by humorous spectacles and odd puzzles. You have somewhat of a support team assisting you in providing intel during your missions, just not on any kind of official level. Your first helper is a gentleman named Irizaru, who's been helping the Smiths for a long time now. His tandems range from being very insightful and cryptic, to just being silly and narcissistic. Along with him is his friend Kikazaru, who helps locate critical items for you, and his former wife Mizaru, who now operates under Katie's command. You also encountered Travis, who is a sarcastic but wise victim of yours, who now stalks you and helps you out with your current mission, and helping you understand the circumstances regarding the nature of the game's world. A few others crop up. A kid who alerts you to new spawns and variations of smiles before you encounter them. An old Asian man who provides you with deliberate hints for certain puzzles, sometimes for a price. And the head of a young woman that rewards your efforts by giving you magical rings that help you progress. There are separate missions in the game that are followed through in a linear order. Each consists of 1 or 2 major parts that are then stages, which are separated by contained levels and areas. Each has their own theme going for them, different puzzles for each, new enemy variations, and the difficulty slowly ramps up the deeper into the game you get. Each mission is ended with a boss battle as well. And that's all you need to know for how the game is played. Comparing all that now to the PC port in specific, it's surprisingly all there. The game is literally a 1-to-1 copy of the GameCube original. The deficits are minor at most, and it's a very stable port in general. You'll even see weird portions of accuracy strewn about. Like on the save menu, you can select memory card A or B, which each have their allotted 7 save slots. Whenever controls are mentioned along with their button inputs, they reference the GameCube controls, like start pause. A bit bizarre, and you might consider it lazy, but from a purist standpoint, it's actually quite welcoming. Just confusing is all. Though weirdly, in the tutorial segment, it pops up with Xbox controls for the icons. It's weird. There's no real improvement in terms of graphical fidelity. It all looks the same for the most part. Grasshopper posted about the pride they took upscaling Travis's shirts to be legible. So there's that, I guess. Like the lanterns, as shown here, that weren't clipped around the edges when, really, they could have been. The game runs almost completely at 60 frames per second. The only time the game really slows down is on purpose, when you're reloading. For whatever reason, they claimed it was because it created a kind of graphical artifact and that they had to cap the FPS of reloading outside of first person to 30 frames. Which is odd, because on GameCube, the game wasn't locked at 30 to begin with. It ran at, I believe, 60, though it could have been a little less. There is a loading stutter here and there when you're moving about. It's not enough to negatively affect you, but if you're perceptive, you'll notice it. The cutscenes have a small issue with the audio syncing up due to the new FPS selection. I'm not sure as to why. Perhaps the frame rate was different for cutscenes on GameCube. I sadly didn't have the setup to go about testing all of this, and comparing it to an emulator wouldn't have gotten me precise results. There's quality of life control implemented into the PC port. For instance, you can now have a hotkey binded to automatically use thin blood to heal yourself. Whereas normally you had to go into the start menu and heal yourself manually. You can also hit 1 through 6 on your keyboard now to switch through the different personalities, where again you used to have to do it through the start menu exclusively. As for mouse and keyboard controls, they work pretty well. Though the problem is, the mouse simply makes the game way too easy. You can be so precise with your aim, it just obsoletes any difficulty involved. Part of the challenge of the game is like handling the recoil of your guns and stuff, but with mouse aim it just doesn't happen, so the key binding menu might seem a little daunting, but don't worry too much about it. And thankfully, right after the game was released, they allowed you to edit the dead zone of your controller. To me, this was a godsend, because the PS4 seems to have some weird dead zones. Regardless, it all functions, and shouldn't cause you any trouble in the end. So, all the technical standpoints are done. So, why exactly should you play this game? Because it's fucking good. Everything in Killer7 is just so out there. It's so hard to get a lock on for this game, to even begin to understand what's happening and how you're supposed to figure it out. And that all just adds to the flair of things. If you just look on it from the surface, you'd see this weird twisted environment where everything contorts yet melds together, but has a bunch of people running around with guns shooting monsters in the face. A world you'd think you'd be able to eventually relate to, yet always get tossed a curveball later on that resets your entire perspective. In the most basic sense, the story is all about a group of psychotic killers who get drummed up into some quasi-governmental assassination squad, and they just roll with it because why not? But you know that's not all there is to it. The themes and suggestions the game lobs at you hints at something way deeper than that. You don't learn it all right away, and you're expected to just roll with it until the game says otherwise. But you may never realize when that moment comes until it's too late. If you're to ignore all the literacy components and just only focus on the gameplay, it's amazing how addictive it is. It's a replication of an arcade-style gameplay, but with the premise of a permanent progression and a tangible end. Almost everything starts becoming second nature to you the more you play. At first you're confused at how things operate, then you get used to it and you know how you're supposed to approach things. Then you fully understand it and don't even feel the need to justify your actions, no matter how bizarre they are. You get lost in this world. You enter an apartment full of exploding happy men blowing people up right in front of you, so you go throughout the complex shooting them all up eventually to find a toilet that lacks any amount of water, so you head down into the public laundromat to crack open a washing machine to have a quick conversation with a decapitated head sitting in it to learn a little bit more about her past, so that she spits you a ring that has the ability to produce a flame that will trigger the water extinguisher system in the washroom so that the toilet now has water and pressure built up to properly flush, which results in an odd metal engraving to slide down the pipelines back into the laundromat, which you then take and combine it with another engraving to open up a secret bookcase entrance in the library somehow located in the complex that enables you to access this odd club that you need to pay to get in with the use of these objects scattered about called soul shells. treat it as currency to let you into this trans-dimensional shift, teleporting you to another section of the apartment, which houses the leader of this supposed terrorist organization, whom turns out to be some prophetic angel who's on a mission from God to purge the unclean from the world, leading up to you discovering that it's no more than a farce perpetrated by another individual, who is the real leader behind all of this, that ends with you shooting a sniper rifle bullet at his hand, which he then grabs and rides it onto another high-rise building, and that's the first level. All the time, you're haunted by remnants from your past, people who you've absorbed into your own psyche that now help you. Some you know personally, some you don't. You've even killed a couple of them, and each have their own twisted little agenda, providing hints and being amused at your attempts to interpret it all. And this weird obsession over blood. It's always about the blood. More of keep needing more blood. Plug it into your TV, transfer the blood somehow, keep it pump, level up, get stronger, get more blood. Where's the blood? Thick blood. Blood, uh-oh. Start experimenting with the different personalities. Two of them function in a very normal manner, but their counterparts will feel wildly different. You'll touch them all eventually, whether you want to or not. It's required. Some play by funny rules. Dan and Coyote operate simply. Revolvers, chargeable shots, and understandable mechanics. Dan can charge up a really powerful bullet that can almost always guarantee a one-shot. Katie's slower than the rest, but she makes up for this with the ability to shoot with precision, making her great at long range and careful aiming. Kevin lacks a firearm and instead throws knives, and whilst not as powerful as the rest, he makes up for this by not needing to reload at all. And even beyond that, he lacks any kind of recoil, making his attacks always hit their mark. Also, he can go invisible. Coyote makes sense to you by now, except for his shooting pattern. He holds his gun in a peculiar fashion, and it physically causes his recoil to aim downwards rather than upwards. It's a funny twist on things. Khan is fast, really fucking fast. He'll blast more bullets than anyone else can, again with a bizarre recoil pattern. It's hard to control. Mask doesn't play by the others' rules, instead opting for high power ordnance in a small area. He can never score critical hits, but with the firepower he has, he can take anything down in a few hits, and he only gets stronger as the story goes on. By the time the game starts, the Killer7 is already in one of its later years of operations. You start on assignment number 33. That makes 32 other operations that you, the player, have no clue about whatsoever. You better be ready to deal with whatever past has already been set. Is it normal for what you're seeing to be believed? Who's truly in control of your members? Why do they possess the powers they do? How are things like the smiles even able to be created? You're not given answers for all of this. Some things become more clear the further down the road you go, but others are not only fuzzy in their details at best, some are deliberately left unanswered with the purpose of you filling in the gaps. And that's what leads into the themes of the story. You deal with a lot of psychological and spiritual thematics over the course of time. Self-realization, acceptance of ghosts and out-of-body experiences, belief in higher beings, understanding one's own power and values. It'll even go so far to make you question authority, politics, agendas of the state and other global powers. Are you acting independently, or are you no more than a tool for someone else? But none of these are ever directly propositioned towards you. A huge amount of dialogue in this game is optional. It's down to the player to actually show any investment or curiosity into the situations you're presented. Maybe you're fine and comfortable with just being told to shoot everything in sight. Maybe that's not an issue for you. But if you really want to delve deeper and try to figure things out, you have to listen. You're thrown advice, curses, regrets, and truths from everyone you meet. Almost everyone is haunted by something in their own little way, and they project it, little by little, the more you dig in. But remember how I said some things just plainly aren't answered, no matter what? I was being very literal about that. When you do talk to the spirits, for instance, you'll notice they have dialogue, both in text and in speech. Everyone has their own recognized characteristic way of conversing. Irizaru always opens up regarding you firstly, then he provides assistance. Travis forgoes formalities and just starts talking cryptically about the situation, but always regards you as chief for something else. Susie loves emoticons to convey emotion. Kess always seems distracted and immersed in his own imagination. Everyone has their own method of madness to explain things, and deliberately, you're not meant to understand a lot of it on purpose. One reason you can figure out why is if you listen to them. In text appears the legible and understandable conversations you have. If you listen to the audio, however, you're probably going to have trouble, and for good reason. While sometimes it might sound like they're actually conveying words that sync up with what's appearing on the screen, they're not actually saying the same thing. Just take the first conversation with Irizaru, for instance. If you can listen in though, he's not saying what's on screen. He's instead saying, it is dangerous, it is serious, and it is dangerous. Odd, isn't it? He's essentially getting the same point across that there is trouble afoot, but he's saying it in two ways at the same time. You'll hear everyone else do the same exact thing. Now you're thinking there could be a number of out-of-game reasons for this. Maybe they were earlier scripts and that had these words and they just reused them for convenience sakes, or some other idea to that. But there is a reality to this. If you play the game in Japanese, well, just give it a listen.
The master. It is dangerous. It is serious and it is dangerous.
Well, if you're a native English speaker, you obviously can't read that text, but you can certainly understand his vocals all of a sudden. If you sit on that for a second, you'll probably realize that the intention from the start was to never fully understand what it was they were saying.
It is me. You remember it, don't you? I am the man killed by your general. It is me. You remember it, don't you?
The chances of a native English speaker understanding Japanese is low, but because the entirety of the game is vocally English no matter what, they came up with a unique way of distorting it to still make it an exceptional challenge of perceiving what they're saying. Meanwhile, with the Japanese audio, it could be left to English because the chances of the Japanese native speaker fully understanding English is low enough that they probably won't catch more than a few words at most. It's a hilarious little trick played on the player. Why is it even there, though, is the funnier question. Maybe it's to emphasize what they're saying only makes half sense. Or the game's telling you to stop overthinking everything and stop being a smartass. Walking across cameras always seems to be what triggers the first shift in personalities when the mission starts. And to completely switch from Garcian to the other 6 later on requires the use of the TV in the master's room. Why electronic equipment like this is utilized so is an odd but interesting premise. Maybe the cameras themselves are meant to embody you, the player, watching this happening through your TV or monitor. When one of the team dies, they reside in the area they fell as a head in a paper bag. Garcian can then find them and return them back to the master's room where he can revive them. You do this by rapidly tapping the A button, which you can sort of guess means you might be pumping blood back into them or something. Funny enough, difficulty selection at the start of the game requires you to tap faster if you choose the harder option. Herman can only ever be talked to when the room is dark yet the light is on, but when there's natural lighting, it's all back to normal. And how are you able to enter his room wherever you go? The boss fights are unusual. They handle more like absurd puzzles than they do actual fights. They always require you to figure out some kind of gimmick or trick in order to defeat the enemy. And most of the time, the bosses aren't really fast or dangerous or anything, they're more just a test of your will. Some of the characters' last names, like Bloody Sunday, Pearl Harbor, the start menu is cool, but just what the fuck is this? What is this box of code proverbs that keeps popping up? There's a lot going on in Killer7. It's not easy to explain. It's not even easy to experience it. It's a game that, as you play through it, nothing will end up making sense. But that doesn't stop you from making sense of it. You don't want to put down the controller when you pick it up. The game has a huge, surreal, and existentialistic vibe going throughout it all. It operates in a very esoteric manner, but regardless of whatever notions or preconceived ideas you have surrounding its themes, you'll want to keep pushing forward, just to see where it comes out of it all. Somewhere I imagine people might complain that the game is no more than it's weird simply because it wants to be. They're probably not wrong, but that doesn't stop any of it from being intriguing and interesting. Many regard the game as a cult classic. It's more or less earned that position. You may have heard of Killer7 sometime in the gaming community without ever actually knowing anything about it, or having played it yourself. But now the opportunity has arrived again, and it works. So there's little reason to pass on this. If you're not in it for its world and lore, play it for its gameplay. It's an amazing blend of a few things that all sum up into its own original beast. If you are interested in its story, you can get ready for one hell of a trip at the very least. And when you do give it a shot, just let your mind go blank the first time through, okay? It'll be a lot nicer for you.
Harmon. The size of the world has changed. It's changed to the size where you can control it with your hands, just like a PDA. The world will keep getting smaller.
Kenshi's coming out soon, and I have Lisa, so those two are probably next.